We begin with more on developments from the Middle East, where the Israeli military has carried out what it describes as extensive airstrikes on cities across Gaza, the largest wave since a ceasefire with Hamas began in January. Well, the Israel Defense Forces have issued new evacuation orders for the areas of Beit Hanun, Huzar, Abasan al-Kabira and al-Jadida. As those strikes continued, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry said that at least 413 people have now been killed, including the highest-ranking Hamas official in the territory, Mahmoud Abi Wafa. In its statement, Hamas blamed unlimited US support for Israel for the deadly strikes in Gaza. Well, the Red Cross has said that many medical facilities in the Gaza Strip are now overwhelmed. This is the scene overlooking Khan Yunis, where the Nasser hospital is, as you can see there, and many of the casualties have been taken to that hospital. Well, in a statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, it said it's instructed the military to take strong action against Hamas in response to what it says is the group's refusal to renegotiate the ceasefire on Israel's terms. An Israeli official telling the AFP that the operation will continue as long as necessary and will expand beyond airstrikes. Hamas has accused the Israeli government of violating and overturning the ceasefire agreement, which they say they offered to extend. Getting international reaction to those airstrikes. Iran condemning the Israeli strikes on Gaza, describing them as a continuation of genocide. Meanwhile, Jordan has also condemned the airstrikes, describing them as barbaric. Well, our correspondent John Donnison is on Israel's southern border and he sent us this update.
So this is Sderot, the Israeli town closest to the border with Gaza. The fence is just about a kilometre away. This is a sort of lookout position and also a memorial to some of the Israeli soldiers who've been killed fighting in Gaza. Now, earlier this morning, we could still hear the distant sound of explosions in Gaza and also some pretty heavy machine gun fire, fighter jets in the air. In Gaza itself, they're saying it's one of the deadliest days of the war so far since October the 7th, 2023. The bodies have been piling up, the hospitals have been inundated with casualties, and after a night like that, well, it's pretty difficult to say that the so-called ceasefire is still intact. I guess the question is this a limited Israeli operation to try and put pressure on Hamas, or is it the start of the war resuming? Now, I was just talking to one soldier just down the road over coffee this morning. He told me that he was one of some 40,000 Israeli soldiers who got a message yesterday calling them up in order to be ready for some sort of operation at the weekend. He told me that some sort of ground invasion was inevitable. He said it was important to finish the job. Another young woman working at the cafe, she said she was happy that it looked like the war might be resuming because she said every day of the ceasefire was giving Hamas a chance to regroup and to plan future attacks on Israel. So there are still plenty of people in Israel who would be happy if the war wasn't over.
That's John Donnison there. Let's bring you some pictures that have just come into us that show you the aftermath of those strikes. These are classrooms in a school in Gaza City, as you can see there, reduced to rubble in the aftermath of those strikes. The latest death toll that we are getting from the Hamas-run health ministry now is 413 people killed in those strikes and hundreds injured, and the Red Cross saying that they are overwhelmed at the moment when it comes to trying to provide healthcare and treatments. To those pictures there, the school in Gaza City. Well, our Gaza correspondent Rushdie Abu-Alouf, who's based in Cairo now, had more about the impact of those airstrikes on people living in the territory.
You know, the intensity of the airstrikes are less than when they started at around 2 o'clock in the morning, but still going on in few places. The last one was in the Middle Camps airstrike that killed 3 people. The prayer, people start the fasting at around 4 o'clock in the morning in Gaza. So the airstrikes started around 2 o'clock, where most of the people were already started preparing or up to prepare the pre-dawn meal. Yes, there is a shortage of food and fuel and water in Gaza, but not like before during the war, because Israel, up until like 2 weeks ago, they used to allow about 500 trucks every day, and there is a lot of items still available in the market. So it's a holy month of Ramadan, and people were enjoying the first 2 weeks and the 57 days since January the 19th, when the ceasefire went into effect. Was a relative calm, despite the difficulties that people are facing and the daily challenge of trying to find food and water.
Rushdie Abu Alouf there, while the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says that more than 413 people have been killed overnight. BBC Verify has been examining footage of the impact in the north and south of the territory. With more, here's my colleague Nick Beak.
Israel's airstrikes overnight were extensive and hit different targets across the Gaza Strip. As you'd expect, there's a lot of video circulating. This is the first one we've verified. It's in the southern city of Rafah. At the moment a strike happens, and you can see smoke rising. Worth pointing out that some of the destruction here will be from previous attacks. There's also this photograph that the team have geolocated. It's just round the corner, again in Rafah, and the design and shape of the building matches what we've seen in that previous video. There's also this footage from the north of Gaza at the Indonesian hospital. We have blurred it because it's really graphic. It appears to show a man carrying a girl who's either dead or unconscious, and you see in a moment he brings her towards the steps of the hospital, and we've matched this location to other videos taken previously from the hospital. Worth pointing out that today one of the key things we're trying to do is checking that video being shared is in fact new. We do that by taking screen grabs and then doing a reverse image search and seeing if anything matches footage that's been previously posted. If there's no match, it's a strong sign that yes, it is a new video. And all of this is helping us build a picture of these deadly Israeli strikes.
Let's take you to the scene live at the Israel-Gaza border. Of course, a recap that these Israeli strikes happened overnight. The Israeli military describing them as extensive strikes. They say it was after talks to extend the ceasefire failed, and these are the largest wave of strikes since the start of the year. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office saying Israel will from now on act against Hamas with increasing military strength, accusing Hamas of repeatedly refusing to release the hostages. Well, let's take you to Jerusalem, where we can see relatives of those who've been held hostage and are still being held hostage. Israel says 59 hostages still being held, some of them no longer alive. These are the families of those. They are actually protesting in Jerusalem. We've had a statement from the hostage families accusing the Israeli government of choosing to, I quote, give up hostages in Gaza as it launched those new strikes. The group's now issued an emergency call, it says, and they've headed to Jerusalem to protest. They believe that the hostages are in grave danger. In a post on X, the families wrote, "There's nothing more urgent than this. With each passing day, the danger to the hostages grows. Military pressure could further endanger their lives and complicate efforts to bring them home safely." Let's show you the scene live as we look over the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, because of course hospitals, according to the Red Cross, are now overwhelmed in Gaza in the wake of those strikes overnight, with hundreds of people injured. But we've been speaking to aid agencies on the ground in the last couple of hours here on BBC News who say they are really struggling to be able to treat people, because already Gaza has been in the midst of a humanitarian crisis with limited access to supplies, and then now another wave of casualties at a time which was already difficult for them. And the latest in terms of the numbers killed, we are hearing, is 413 people killed in those strikes. Hamas accusing Israel of attacking defenceless civilians. Hamas saying that mediators should hold Israel fully responsible for violating and overturning the ceasefire. Well, we've been hearing from the Israeli foreign minister. Let's have a listen to what they had to say about those strikes.
As of this morning, Israel is operating with full force against the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. We have reached this situation after the Hamas repeatedly refused proposal to extend ceasefire and to release our hostages. Hamas rejected 2 concrete mediation proposals presented by the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Israel agreed to these mediation proposals. Hamas refused them. The IDF is striking Hamas terrorist targets across the Gaza Strip, aiming to achieve the war's objectives. From this point forward, Israel will act against Hamas with increasing military intensity.
Well, let's hear from some analysts on what they think might come next. Professor Yossi Meckelberg is a senior consulting fellow at the think tank Chatham House.
I think that Israel decided that the ceasefire is over. They also, in doing what they've done overnight, and probably this is going to continue, have given up on bringing back the hostages. And then we need to see, as you say, where we go from now. Are we going to see an intensification of this bombardment and basically going back, as we heard from the spokesperson from the foreign ministry, is that going back to the original objectives, as Israel said, of the war, which were complete elimination of Hamas, which goes against actually what he said in his first instance, that it was about actually Hamas refusing or rejecting a ceasefire or the phase 2 proposal. So that's exactly what the question, if this is only one day, one instance of this attack, or basically Israel says from now on we are going back to war.
And we've seen and heard from Hamas that some of their senior figures were killed in those strikes. How significant was that?
It is significant. It's also, it seems that those who were killed were more from the political wing, which again is the message that Israel is going after not only destroying Hamas military capabilities, but also its ability to govern Gaza. And the question also, who is going to negotiate the next phase, the release of the hostages, the rebuilding of Gaza, if the entire leadership is eliminated. But again, one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is the timing of this attack in a day that Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to give evidence in court in his corruption trial, in a day that he was supposed to bring to the cabinet his decision to fire the head of the internal security, the Shin Bet.
We just heard from the EU's aid chief, who says the renewed escalation in Gaza, I quote, must stop. Well, earlier I spoke to freelance journalist Ghada Uda, who is in Gaza City. She told me about the reaction on the ground to events, including those latest evacuation orders which have been issued by Israel.
Well, the Israeli military also announced that evacuation orders starting from north to south along the border fence and the buffer zone around 2 kilometers away from the fence. So this is something terrible. People start to evacuate from North Gaza, especially from Beit Han, which is very close to the border fence, and from Khuza'a and Abasan in south, in east, south of Khan Yunis. People, they feel like they don't have the freedom to live peacefully, and they consider this operation as a pressure process for Hamas to release more hostages and to extend the phases of releasing the hostages. They are hoping that this military operation will end soon and will not result in killing more people, and they don't want to be displaced anymore.
Ghada Uda on the ground in Gaza, a freelance journalist there. Of course, international journalists are not permitted to report from inside Gaza. That's from the Israeli government there. Well,